J'espère, j'espère un jour que on pourra dire Herbert Huncke puis on l'appréciera pleinement sans avoir à faire des références à la Beat Generation, Kerouac, Ginsberg, Burroughs, tout ça. Maintenant, je la fais une dernière fois. La prochaine fois, c'est Herbert Huncke, tout seul.
Okay, well, let me just say first, before I start, all of what has happened this evening and the past week, kind of a hard act to follow, believe me. Oh, well, all right, in the mic, he says. Okay. Can you hear now? Yes. See, I have a problem with this lighting situation here. Regardless of all that, I lost my place. How do you like that?
Talk into the mic.
I will in just a minute. Some people can hear me, though. Are you satisfied now? Okay. I really want to start off with one particular story here because I feel that it will fit into the general theme of the so-called gathering or festival, whatever, group of creative people doing things, trying to do things, young people. It's very, very encouraging to an old man like me. You know, I want to think that things have progressed a little. Boy. Well, here, I wasn't going to read this one, but I will. I'll start anyway, so everything is under control. It's called Cuba. It's a rather strange story in that the individual involved was someone I met and felt somewhat sorry for, if I may be permitted to feel sorry about anybody. Cuba is what is known in present prison jargon as a peddler. He's a real hustler in the sense that if there is anything in the way of contraband or band to be obtained within the prison, such as eggs, meat, grease, winter overshoes, coats, shirts, tailor-made pants, special hair preparations, aftershave lotions, and so forth, he is the man to see. When any new young boys or fags or potential broads appear on the scene, Cuba is the first to know about him and loses no time making contact. When I first met him, he was serving out the last year of a 10-year sentence. He had been paroled on one occasion and deported back to Cuba. He refused to remain there and through some manner or other succeeded in returning to New York, where he immediately became a dope pusher. He operated fairly effectively until he was caught and returned to prison. And I can't recall a great deal of his past history, although I became friendly with him, and he spent much time telling me about himself. The first time I saw him, he was coming across the prison yard. It was summer, and he was without a shirt. And the entire upper part of his body was a mass of scars from the shoulders to the waist. And once seeing him in the shower, I noticed a continuation of these scars on his legs. He obtained these scars, which are like shrimp pink-colored welts, by lacerating himself on numerous occasions with razor blades. Whenever he becomes enraged or has a right or has done a right or has not done a right or does something of which he is deeply ashamed, he slashes himself afterward. Just a short while before I left the prison, he went into his cell after an episode in which he had beaten a man severely in a fight and had been punished with 60 days keep lock, 60 days, which meant almost solitary confinement, and cut himself so that there was something like 172 stitches which were required to staunch the flow of blood. He is short of stature with a well-proportioned body. He is of light tan color with, other than the scars, a smooth, almost delicate appearing skin, quite free of chest hair, and nearly beardless. He has pleasantly symmetrical facial features, deep, innocent brown eyes, and he wears at all times a thin gold chain with a large, nearly the size of a quarter, medallion given him by his mother, and also a thin red silk cord with a tiny rose-shaped knot in it, of which he is quite secretive, refusing to explain what it means, resenting having anyone touching it around his neck. He considers himself a great lover and is always in the midst of a passionate affair with one of his fellow inmates. He constantly speaks of the size and shape of everybody's ass and will exclaim in positive terms, "Man, I got to cop," each time he sees an ass which especially appeals to him. He goes to great lengths arranging meetings in the yard with his most recent desire, and will entice them up to his court, where he surreptitiously feels them all the time, trying to convince them that they should get a job in the mess hall where he is working, and that all he wants to do is kiss them on the ass. And he will say, "Man, I don't want to fuck you. Just love you, man. I like your ass. Come in the mess hall. We have our own shower there. We turn steam on and shower. Nobody see. I cop lots of times that way. And you let me, you love her, your ass, and I jerk off." Sometimes he is successful and goes around beaming at everybody and telling his friends all about how this time he has a lover that really loves him, and that this time he is not only going to kiss his ass, but he's going to get in. And he keeps himself well supplied with cigarettes from peddling activities and sees to it that his current interest is never without smokes. And he is a very kind person and is always doing unexpected favors for people he likes. And he gambles a great deal, and if he wins, sometimes gives all his winnings away to people he knows haven't anything of their own. And about a week ago, before I left the prison, someone finally turned a note in to the principal keeper about him. Just what it was supposed to have contained, no one was quite sure, but whatever it said apparently caused the principal keeper to refer Cuba's name to the prison psychiatrist, who promptly called Cuba up for an interview, resulting in Cuba being sent over the wall to the state prison for the insane. When prisoners are transferred from the main prison to the state hospital, they are, if violent, placed in straitjackets, restraining jackets they call them, and if not violent, are handcuffed and ankle shackled. And when we last saw Cuba, he was being literally dragged into the waiting station wagon and wearing a restraining jacket. Sorry, it's not the one I want. Oh, I can't drink now. I'll fall flat. Thank you. Let me see if I can find the one I intended to start out with. Alvarez, 151. Okay, we'll get there. Hell or high water. There. This is I feel it's a very, very sad story myself. Whoops. Alvarez. I first saw him when I climbed into the patrol wagon. And he was sitting well toward the back, all drawn up into a tight knot, his head sunk between his shoulders, and arms wrapped around his body, knees pressed together and pulled up toward his chin so that only the tips of his toes supported his weight. And he was wearing a trench coat several sizes too large, which hung and looped. And suddenly he vomited, regurgitating globs of green bile, and then fell back afterward on the seat, moaning. We were going down to police headquarters to be fingerprinted, photographed, put through the show-up, and formally booked and charged with our respective crimes, examined and thoroughly frisked, interviewed, then sent through a cold shower, and finally assigned to a floor and a cell in the city prison to wait trial. And I couldn't help but speculate about how they expected to get this man through the entire procedure, which is an ordeal even when one is in good health, without his collapsing completely. We were the only two prisoners in the wagon. The cop who was sitting guard over us kept making remarks to me about how disgusting it was to see anyone in such a condition. And the poor son of a bitch would be better off dead, and I ain't got no sympathy for you guys. Why do you do it? And there ain't nothing worse than junk. How come you ain't like him? You're a junkie too, ain't you? Oh, well, you'll probably get like that later. The ride downtown seemed interminable, and I was glad when we stopped and the cop said, "End of the line, let's go. Come on, no stalling." I was still feeling fairly good, but he had to be dragged and cuffed alongside the head before he could manage to stagger and half fall out of the wagon and down the stairs past the newspaper reporters and photographers and into headquarters, where we were separated. And at headquarters, things moved slowly, and it wasn't until much later in the day that I saw him again. At headquarters, I was assigned to a cell where I waited until they called me out to be printed and photographed, after which I was taken upstairs to the show-up and then down to the courtroom where I appeared before a judge who decided what bail was to be set, and then over to the city prison. Sometimes, if a junkie is very sick, or if the detective handling the case is afraid the junkie is apt to be sick in the courtroom, something the judges frown upon, arrangements are made for the junkie to have a fix or a shot. Such must have happened with the fellow who had ridden down with me, because he was certainly in much better shape when they led him into the bullpen, where we were to wait until assignment to our regular cells. And finally our names were called, and we were led over to the shower room, where we were stripped from our clothes and left them in a pile. Each piece was closely examined. Seams were carefully felt for concealed needles or stashes of junk. And the shoes were banged on the floor and inspected for false heels or soles, while we stood in a shower of cold water or waited shivering until the frisk was over. And after dressing, we were led before a doctor and given a cursory examination. We were asked how long we had used junk and what kind. And the sick man behind me in line, and while talking to the doctor, asked for a fix. And he was told, "There will be no fix for you. This is a jail, not a sanitarium. You kick cold turkey." And we were both sent to the 8th floor. They try to keep the junkies all together, and his cell was too from mine or two down from mine, and the cells in the city prison were originally designed to accommodate one, but in the last few years have been used to hold two. Each cell now contains an upper and a lower bunk, and a toilet, a wash basin, a stool or seat which lets down from the wall, and a small square metal shelf or ledge which serves as a table. And each prisoner is issued 3 blankets, not always clean, a sheet, a pillowcase, and a towel. And the bunks consist of a set of springs. There are no mattresses or pallets, and sometimes no pillows. Therefore, it is necessary to use at least one of the blankets as a sort of pad over the springs. Before, there were 2 springs in each cell, and when it became necessary to put 2 men in a cell, one or the other was forced to sleep on the floor. Each floor is broken up into 4 sections and alphabetically designated: A section, B section, C section, D section. And in each section there is a flats, or the main floor row of cells. And then above that, a tier, or the row of cells immediately above those of the flats. There are approximately 48 to 50 cells in each section. The cells face a sort of well which runs the full length of each row, extending as far over as a catwalk and surrounding the entire floor. Large full-length panels of small frosted glass windows extend around each floor, and once one is on the inside, one sees daylight, but never a glimpse of the outside. The cells are opened early in the morning, usually shortly after breakfast, which is served on trays and brought to the cells by trustees. And regardless of how one feels, it is required the prisoners gather out on the flats and remain there until it is time for the midday meal, when they return to their cells for an hour and then come out again for what is termed afternoon recreation. This routine never varies and is only an additional discomfort for junkies or addicts who are sick and weak and in most instances unable to stand for long, and who must sit with head bowed over a long table flanking the side of the catwalk, if lucky, or end up sitting on the floor. And the cells are closed, and one can't get back into one's own cell until next lockup. I had managed to get through my first days without getting sick. I had fixed only a short time before they arrested me, so that it wasn't until the following day that the real misery, so to speak, began. I had been put into a cell with a fellow who had been there almost 2 weeks and who was over the worst of his kicking. Probably the worst thing about kicking a habit cold turkey is being unable to sleep. I have talked to men who have gone 3 or 4 weeks without sleep, and nothing is quite so agonizing as lying on a set of springs which cut into you no matter how you try, and pad them from squeaking with each breath you take, and are lopsided and frequently broken. On the first night, I slept fitfully, becoming familiar with the night sounds of a prison. The guard passing with flashlight and jingling keys, farts, snoring, groaning, sleep talk and flushing toilets, phone ringings, muffled conversations, closing doors, church chimes, traffic shouts on the streets below, and the constant noise of people sick and unable to sleep, moving and adjusting, seeking a more comfortable position. My companion of the morning, whose name I had learned was Alvarez, cried, groaned, stopped the guard begging to see a doctor and asking for something to ease his pain. And he called for Maria, Rita, Lola, and banged against the bars and was told to shut up, for Christ's sake. Lay down, you bastard. There are others trying to sleep. Come out swinging in the morning, you punk fuck. You ain't any sicker than I am. All by other prisoners. When I saw him the following morning, he looked like a zombie. He staggered out of the cell with a blanket-wrapped shawl fastened around his shoulders, his hair hanging down over his forehead and eyes, shivering and shaking and racked with dry heaving, unable to vomit anymore because there was no longer even green bile in his stomach, and he kind of collapsed into a heap on the floor and remained there the entire morning, while other prisoners wanting to pass him simply stepped over him. Once he managed to get up long enough to wander down toward the end of the flats and called to the guard on duty asking to see a doctor, and the guard told him to get the fuck back inside. And the doctor won't be around until later. And this occurred on a Saturday. And he did see a doctor in the afternoon, and the doctor gave him a paper cup of aspirin, about 10, which he swallowed all at one time, and afterward he set fire to the paper cup, holding it straight out in front of him, staring intently at the flame, half smiling, mumbled something in Spanish until the flame burned his fingers and he dropped the charred remains of the cup on the floor. And the smile left his face and was replaced by a look of sadness. And other prisoners had gathered around him, sort of watching him in awe, talking among themselves, suggesting he was crazy. On Sunday morning, he remained alone in a corner, once again doubled up in a tight knot, sitting on the floor, resting his head on his knees, and several Spanish-speaking prisoners tried talking with him, but he wouldn't answer, or he would look at them out of tear-filled eyes, saying, I'm sick. And once the guard came down and spoke to him, and he just looked at him, not answering, until the guard walked away. And late in the afternoon, just before lockup, he shit and pissed all over himself, and his cellmate refused to go into the cell with him until the guard ordered a couple of prisoners to take him up to the shower and wash the stink off him. And they put him under an ice-cold shower, and he stood there with his hands hanging at his sides, crying. His flesh hung on his body, exposing his bones. And they let him out, and he groped his way back to the cell, where he fell exhausted on his bunk, his whole being racked by sobbing. And that night, he kept everyone awake, calling for God. And Monday to Friday is always busy because the prisoners have to make court appearance. And on this particular Monday, Alvarez's cellmate had to appear in court during the afternoon session. And he was late returning, so that we were all locked in for the night when he got back. And he came walking down the line of cells until he reached his own. And suddenly he yelled, Jesus Christ, this guy is dead. And Alvarez had died sitting up. And when they opened the cell and carried him out to put him on the stretcher, they had to straighten him out. And he had died all folded up, his hands and his arms wrapped around his legs, all drawn up so that his head could rest on his arms. And once again, he'd shit and pissed on himself. And I suppose he was really dying when I first saw him. Okay. Hey. Want any more? Or shall I? Are you sure? Well, wait a minute. Okay. You want a rest period? No? Not really. On my hand. Huh? I'd like to find something just a little. Tell you. Anyway, the first time I saw Russian Blackie, I was standing at the old Times Square bar, 42nd Street and 8th Avenue, now long gone. And he was rather weaving back and forth, both arms spread wide, clutching the edge of the bar with his hands and moving his head slowly from side to side, glaring straight ahead toward the huge mirror which made up the back bar. Obviously was very drunk, and as I learned later, loaded to his ears on Seconal and pot, and at this point tossing off double hookers of straight whiskey. Although the place was crowded with many of the regular habitués, most of whom knew Blackie, immediately around him was a cleared space, no one wishing to get too close to him, as he was, even when cold sober, unpredictable, and when drunk, if nothing else, always full of anger and hostility. And Blackie stood about 6 feet tall and was broad-shouldered, neither slim nor heavy. His hair was almost blue-black, and he never allowed it to become long or unkempt. His facial features were regular and well-shaped, and he was considered a very handsome man. His eyes were deep brown, and when one spoke with him, looking directly into his face, it was always difficult to read his expression. One could never be sure whether he was angry or pleased, amused or disgusted, bored or entertained. He was immaculate about his dress, favoring dark-colored suits, well-tailored and properly fitted, with white shirts and neat conservative ties in winter. His overcoat was invariably a Chesterfield styling, and frequently he would go without a hat, but always wore gloves, and they fitted his hands like another's skin. No, it's all right if they want to talk, let them. This was the middle of a cold spell, the wind sharp and penetrating, cutting deep into the marrow of one's bones. Although Blackie was very intoxicated, he had somehow retained his dapper appearance. I didn't know anyone I wished to spend time with, and didn't remain long at the bar. What time I did stay was spent in observing Blackie, in a sense, scrutinizing him. And at some point, he found something amusing, and a great smile broke across his countenance. His teeth were large and even and very white. And seeing him smile, he stood revealed as a very intriguing and attractive person. And the thought flashed through me, he would undoubtedly be a great guy to know. I departed, and it was several days before I saw Blackie again, and this time I was introduced to him. We each acknowledged the introduction and then went our respective ways. But from then on, we would meet every day, and most of these times we'd say hi and keep going. Once or twice we had coffee and killed about 15 minutes or maybe 20 talking about 42nd Street, making scores, the whole Times Square scene, and the usual everyday topics such as weather. Uh, the approach of spring and how drunk we'd been the night before. And once in a while, I'd see him with other 42nd Street characters. He knew everyone on the street, but when not alone, was usually with a couple of fellows he knew and seemed to be hardcore 42nd Street hustlers who were sharp dressers and reputed to go out occasionally on jobs, and maybe a stick-up or a burglary, and I had seen one of them knock a guy flat in one well-aimed blow. And this same cat later became a good friend of mine, now married and a father and living in Brooklyn. And the Russian and I finally became close friends through a series of events which were in a degree cumulative and seemingly unrelated. And as I grew more familiar with the environment of Times Square, and particularly 42nd Street, I learned to at least recognize my neighbors or the people who lived and participated in the activities of the area. I joined or became part of a crowd that hung around the cafeteria. Bickford's, Chase's, Hector's, the Automat, which remained open all night. And I got to know all the hotels, and I stayed in them, sometimes alone, but more often with people I'd meet, mostly men and occasionally women. And then, now and then, sitting at the tables with other cats like myself, living principally by their wits, I'd speak of my scores, and gradually I became known and trusted, I suppose is the term best applied when people speak of their exploits in the underworld and expose their secrets. And I became acquainted with the thieves who had become professional in their lines, pickpockets, boosters, muggers, a few stick-up men, burglars, and automobile hustlers, and many who never revealed their specialties exactly, but hinted at knowing everything in the book. And as they might have said, talking at different times with various people, frequently we'd be joined by the Russian. And once he fell in and spoke to me directly about doing him a favor. Would I cop him some Secanols? He had run out, and it seemed wouldn't be able to see his druggist until the next day. I had lost no time in locating a drugstore following my arrival in the city, and they supplied me with Benny's First, which had just become illegal without prescription, and later the same store sold me damn near anything except hard-ass narcotics. I obliged Blackie and copped for him, and next, when he asked me to do the same, I took him with me and introduced him to the druggist, and then one night zonked out of my mind on schmeck. Pot, Benzedrine, Secanols. Met a cat I had become friendly with, who was a kind of John or Mark. And he would come to 42nd Street after finishing work at his place of employment. And he was lonely and attracted to young men of the knock-around Times Square, hipster types, hustler types. And he was a good spender, and one always ate and could get a flop, and besides, he came on fairly straight, and one could relax and pretty much be themselves without, boy, I can't see worth a damn anymore, much be themselves with him. And we spoke for a few minutes, and he commented about how I appeared, and added that although he expected to see a friend from around the square he'd promised to give money to, and maybe if I understood, wouldn't expect to receive much money in the morning, but he would like to meet the cat I was with and have him come along. And I accepted the invitation and then met Blackie for the first time in an environment away from the hardcore 42nd Street. And he proved to be an amazingly congenial and affable companion, obviously well versed in ways of being entertaining and agreeable. And apparently he had met our host many years before, and from parts of the conversation between them, I gathered, although their acquaintance began in the usual fashion for both of them, it soon ripened into a friendship of mutual respect, and Blackie seemingly delighted in telling of his exploits and would sense the amusement he stressed conversationally as being part of his interest in all of his activities, involving the manner in which he lived. And at one point he told of taking advantage of several opportunities to make money and named several people we all knew as victims, while we all gossiped and reminisced, and both were conscientious about keeping me posted and frequently drawing me into communication, asking if I was aware of a particular place or building, or had I seen a particular person hanging around Bickford's, and giving quick biographical and descriptive clues as to exactly who they might be discussing. Somebody bored? It's all right. If they're bored, they're bored. We were never as close as Blackie was with many. We were never as close as Blackie was with many people. But a sort of bond grew and existed between us. There are innumerable aspects of his personality I wasn't aware of and would be pressed to analyze, and we did share a kind of love and mutual regard for each other. And there was reserve and hardness in him, difficult to penetrate, yet there was always a straightness, perhaps a consciousness of beauty in all of his actions. The Russian, as he was frequently called among his more intimate associates, impressed me, and my life became, in a sense, richer or greater for having known him. I suppose there were women in his life during the time I knew him, important and emotionally involved with him. But oddly, it was his closest friend's girl and later wife, Blackie, showed interest in and spent much time with, and his friend Frank trusted him implicitly. Nor do I think his trust was ever really misused. Blackie had the old-fashioned concept of loyalty, believing one does not covet his neighbor's wife. And I'm inclined to think perhaps she may have tried, resting her womanly charms, but the Russian stood firm, so to speak, and they all three remained staunch friends. And after the marriage and the arrival of the first child, it was amusing to see Blackie, red-eyed and angry, appearing, glaring defiantly out toward the shadowed corners of the room, ready to sweep clean the darkness of lurking danger in defense of Frank Jr., proud and pleased with the responsibility of babysitting. There was a slight change in Blackie's personality and general requirements after Frank married, Where once there had been a partner to rely on, at a moment's notice, it became a matter of operating alone. More often than not, and he was and may still be an effective hustler, still he did not become more settled and was less apt to be seen staggering from one side to the other, ready for a slugfest or to simply belt someone for the hell of it. And 2 years after the birth of the first baby, there was a second baby. By this time, Blackie was well trained. And we ran into each other about a year ago. Except for a little more weight and less ebullience, he is very much as he has always been.
Au nom de tous les participants, il faudrait remercier et féliciter les organisateurs d'Ultimatum, Alan Lodge et Joe Design. Remercier tous les participants.